Good morning. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I imagine we might have a few more trickle in. So continuing with our guest speaker series in our leadership skills class, we have Scott Sherrill with us today, coming all the way from Salt Lake City, Utah. So Scott, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, glad to be here.
I want to go ahead and just kind of turn this over to you and allow you to introduce yourself and give everybody a little bit of background of who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. Good morning, all. Currently I work, I moved to Salt Lake City recently to take a position with a company called Omni. I'm the COO here, and we basically we extract legal and economic data out of documents, and we present it in a dashboard format for investors. So as you might imagine, this is a pretty interesting time. On the flip side, it also gives us a pretty good insight into kind of what's going on in the investment community and the business world and things like that. So it's a really exciting time. This is the second recession that I've been through, and I've always found them, while challenging, to be very interesting. And if you execute things right, it can be a lot of fun, and you can come out of it even better. That's not necessarily applicable to negotiation, but it might be in some instances. Before that, though, I went to my undergrad at UT. I majored in French and international business there, which is, a semi-useful major. I probably could have done something more useful, but it was always the plan to go to law school, and I did. So after undergrad, I took a year off. I worked for a little while, and then I went to law school and did a JD MBA at Boston University. After law school, I practiced corporate law for 3 years, and then and that was in Boston. And then I came back and I got a job with a private equity company down in Tennessee, and I was briefly an in-house CEO for them, and then they needed some help in one of their portfolio companies. And so I jumped over, became the chief customer officer of one of their portfolio companies. And I was there for about 6 years. So it was quite a long stint for me. And then ended up in this position. A law school friend of mine had started the company. They'd finished their Series A funding, and he asked if I wanted to come join them. And so that was a negotiation in and of itself. It was an interesting one. But that's kind of my background. I had a plan when I went through it, and it was go to law school, join a venture capital company, and then start my own company. So I've kind of followed it, but right now it's helping my friend run his company, which is a lot of fun right now. So that's a little bit of my background. I don't know if anybody had any questions, but I didn't want to belabor the point there or take up too much time on just the background portion.
Any questions? Anyone looking at maybe going into law school or, curious about Scott's studies or extracurriculars at UT? Didn't you play rugby?
I did. I played rugby for 2 years there. And then I think I quit after my third concussion. I was like, I probably need this to function later in life. So
probably
I'll stop doing that. Yeah. There was, you guys are in a really interesting time right now. The next 18 months are going to be very difficult for some people. And if you're in school, that's great. That's a chance to buckle down, learn. You can weather it out in school. A lot of people tend to weather recessions in school. Like I see that Avery's going to Chapel Hill Law School in the fall. That's great. Congratulations. But for those of you entering the workforce, it will be a difficult time. And what you're going to have to do to navigate that is basically the same thing that comes with what I believe is sort of the core of a good negotiation. And it really comes down to two things. One is patience, and you gain patience through through choices that give you optionality. So a little bit of the decision, around that, or explanation around that is, you can always get the best deals if you have patience and are able to have patience. Just waiting. Sometimes you can kind of see where deals are going, and I forgot to tell you guys, I'm also an investor myself. I'm an investor in some local businesses, actually there in Knoxville, and then also some real estate. So you can always get the best deals if you are educated and you can wait for the right situation that allows you to get that deal. The situation might be something that the seller has to sell, or the situation might be something where you have something, whether it be knowledge or skills or actual material goods that the seller needs and can't get it anywhere else. By waiting and by being able to be patient, you can find those deals and allow them to come to you, and you're not forced to make a decision. You're BATNA. You guys covered that, right? You're still muted.
Yeah, sorry. We're actually talking about that a little bit after your discussion today. So if you wanted to kind of give us a down and dirty.
Your best alternative to a negotiated agreement is your status quo, which is, you can take it or leave it, and it doesn't really change your trajectory. So the way that you gain the way that you gain this patience that allow you to have this patience situations is by making choices that give you optionality, that give you options. The easiest way to think of this is in the traditional market, which is where you buy an option in the traditional market, which says that I'm going to pay you a little bit of money now, and if the stock goes up, I get to buy it at the price that I locked in when I paid you, and then you can go and immediately sell it on the market, and you make the spread. The thing about markets, though, and especially the stock market, is that it's very difficult to have an informational advantage that allows you to profit very well off of that, because it's really already priced in. But there are a lot of inefficient markets out there where you can buy optionality, and it could be just optionality in life, to allow you to have a better outcome. So one example of optionality in life that I was thinking of is, and I know this sounds very elementary, because it is simply being frugal and being wise with your spending. And it does two things. If you have a low burn, it means that your alternative, the status quo, isn't so bad. You know how to live like that. And this is especially important on things like when you negotiate for a job, which a lot of you are going to be doing. A lot of you don't have a lot of it may not apply to you as much on your first job, but because a lot of you don't have as much experience right now, and really all you have to offer is the fact that you have you're sharp, you have good education, and you might work for cheaper than somebody with 10 years of experience, right? That's what you have to offer, and frankly, you should work that because it's useful. But later, when you negotiate your salary, which you should do regularly, I've renegotiated my salary 3 times within a job I'm already in. It helps if your burn is low, and you can just say, look, the alternative is that I go and I leave and I go find another job, but I have enough cushion to leave. And I'm confident in my network that I've built. I've built optionality through building a network that I can do this. The second piece, and this goes back to the other thing about being frugal, is that this is very applicable to this market, is that if you have a stash of cash, you can deploy it when the market is down. When others who haven't made similar choices to you need to sell or need to strike deals, you have something that they need, and they need it quickly, most likely. So that's kind of I'm gonna get this sun. It's getting right in my face. So sorry, just a second. That's an overview of how I tend to see negotiating. It comes to a series of choices that lead to the moment of negotiation. And for me, that's how it works. A lot of you may be particularly charming and may be able to negotiate in a different way. And it's a lot better. My law school friend, he's an excellent salesman. And that's just not my style, so everybody has their own way. Could you guys still see me? All right, good, because I was just getting killed by that sun.
Let's also, so since you are in Salt Lake, you're on mountain time, so it is bright and early for you.
Yeah, the sun's just rising over the peaks right now and shining into my face.
Yes. Jackie is with us, and she's in California, so she feels you right now.
Oh, all right. Yeah, a little earlier there. So that's a rundown, guys. But I wanted to get any questions that you guys had. Feel free to ask them at any time. I'm very curious as to what your thoughts are, what you've been learning, and how you think you might be able to apply those situations going forward. And before I open it up, I will say that being able to effectively negotiate is not a matter of knowing which tricks and tips and things like that. It's just a few mental models, BATNA being one, right? You can call it whatever you want, but like, what's the alternative, right? So it's just a few mental models, and then it's just being straightforward and straightforward with yourself and understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are. And generally, you want to be honest with whoever you're negotiating with, especially because most negotiations are repeat players. It's a game that you play again and again, and you're going to run into the same people over and over in these arenas that you play in. So it doesn't mean you have to be completely transparent with everything, your current situation, but it does mean being honest, being straightforward. It helps you a lot in future negotiations. It makes things a lot easier.
Very cool. Now, Scott, you when you talked about having small business investments, especially in Knoxville, what are some of the things that your businesses are having to kind of address right now? What are some of the things that you guys are discussing at this time?
Yeah, so that's really an interesting one. This right now, anybody who is on a razor's edge is probably not going to make it, and I can just tell you from what we're seeing in my current work is that the venture capital groups, they're basically categorizing their portfolio companies into 3 tiers. You've got red, or you've got green, which have like a good runway of 18 to 24 months cash. You have yellow, which is sort of 12 to 18 months, and anybody below that, 12 months or less of runway of cash, have been put into the red group. And in that red group, they're basically saying, look, we're gonna help save the top 20%, the ones we think really have a lot of potential, and the rest we're just gonna let die. And that's just the way it is. And so from my businesses, with them, we've practiced the same thing that I just harped on, which was preserving optionality. So what we did when we saw the virus hit China, and I knew it was coming. I just kind of felt it. It was just one of those things. We placed an order for a large order for a supply of things that we would need. And in this case, I have to give credit to the owner or to the manager. He's also an owner himself, because he placed the order before I said anything. And in this case, it's a brewery, just to give you a little bit of heads up. And the owner or the active manager of the brewery placed an order for 1.5 pallets of cans, because if tap rooms get shut down, the cans are going to be the only way to distribute your beer other than growlers, right? Especially if bars get shut down, right? You can't distribute kegs out to bars. So in terms of optionality, what happened was you buy the cans, which are a relatively small price. They're not a huge fixed capital expense. And worst case scenario, it takes a year for you to get through those. You have the crowlers in the brewery, and you maybe have some special release smaller 16-ounce cans or something like that. That's your worst case scenario. You have some extra cans. It's not terrible. But the other alternative, if you didn't order those cans, is much worse. You're screwed. You're belly up. And so now it comes to that not only is this brewery able to retain all of its people, which is great because nobody wants to lay anybody off if you can help it. Not only that we're able to retain all the people, but we are in a stronger position to do two things. The first is be gracious with other breweries and sell off some of those cans, maybe at a small profit, but not very much. Just basically keep the community going. And the second is that the brewery is now in a good position to jump on the inevitable acquisition opportunities when this all ends, because there will be some breweries that won't make it, and we need space for extra capacity because we can't brew enough beer. So that is what's going to happen, and we will be having frank negotiations with people who are in those straits. We will be, obviously gracious. Everybody wants to leave with their dignity intact, but they also want to leave, and they don't. The alternative for them is bankruptcy. So this is what happens when you are patient and you preserve optionality. That's an excellent question, Sarah. The same goes for my real estate. Is that I have friends who are extremely leveraged in real estate. Real estate is something that you can leverage a lot because banks are used to lending on land, and it's assumed to be relatively stable, grows at about 3% a year, more or less with inflation, although that might change with this stimulus. But you can lever almost as far as you want. It's like one of those things where you sit something on the edge of a table, right? If you have at least 2/3 on the table and 1/3 off, and you can do that again and again and again, you can go almost to this huge area that's just barely levered. But if you put a little bit of weight at the top, it all comes falling down. So rather than be extremely leveraged, I have leverage because it's smart, but instead you leave a good buffer of cash so that if my tenants could no longer afford to pay, which may happen, I can be gracious and allow them to say, look, we'll hold off for 2 months and then you can catch up later. But I have a buffer to allow myself to have that negotiation. So, so that's how I'm handling those in kind of some of my current businesses.
Thank you. All right, let's hear from the students. Have you considered investing in new businesses, starting your own business, investing in real estate? Have you guys considered any of that? And do you have any questions along those terms? Or do you have any questions about possibly negotiating your salary in that first job as you get into the workforce here in the next couple months? Or I have a question. You had said that people sometimes ride out recessions in school. For those that are graduating, if they had considered going on to do a master's degree or a higher level, do you think that this would be a good time for them to do that or to consider that?
Depends on the degree, right? So when you go to school, if it's not paid for through scholarship, you're going to be taking on more debt, which means when you get out, you're going to have less options because you're going to have to get a job to pay off that debt. So for some people, if you've gone through undergrad and you have a nominal amount of debt, a smaller amount of student debt, or zero, if you're very lucky, you might be in a better position than if you go to graduate school, especially if you're going to go to graduate school for something that requires you to become only a professor and teach that thing, right? Which is a limited field that has limited options and might be changing due to this recession, especially for the new people coming in. So my answer to that is think very critically about that, because right now, if you have very few practical skills, but you have also zero debt, you can take really cool chances that even if they don't pay, they pay in other ways in terms of connections, experience, and maybe you can take a bet on a startup. I mean, you can say, look, I have a really low burn. I need maybe $20,000 a year to live. And I know that's really, That's a small burn, but give it all to me in options. I know this thing's going to succeed. And when it does, I want, instead of 0.5% of this company, I want 3% or something like that. And so if it does hit, the options or the upside is, so I have a question that says, say you're new to investing, how would you recommend getting started? Depends how much, how would I recommend getting started? Learning would be it. And I would say understand the space you're playing in or that you intend to play in. And that means learn the way you learn best. So for me, that was a lot of reading and a lot of reading on forums, because you have to learn from other people. But I'm not the best in terms of just calling people up all the time and just talking to them and running things by them. I like to take something, digest it, and think about it a lot longer. So mine was a lot of reading in terms of books, but also in terms of internet stuff, and then finding a couple of people that I really enjoyed talking to that simply became my friends, and talking about this stuff all the time. So more important than the money in investing is the knowledge, because having information asymmetry allows you to make wiser decisions than the person on the other side of the negotiating table. Same thing, Zachary had a similar question. The most important advice going into real estate investing is that you need to learn. Real estate investing is all local. So in this case, not only do you have to learn some of the legal stuff, you need to know some of that, but you really, really, really need to know the local market. And that means essentially buying wherever you live and understand. So for example, now I'm out here in Salt Lake City. I rented when I came out here. I didn't buy when I just came out here. I rented and I'm renting a townhouse. It's, not ideal for me and a young family with dogs right now, but it allows me to learn the market and make a better decision in the long term for my own personal house and for anything that might be an investment. But this is an interesting time again. Now I have to find some more information for any future negotiations, which would be, okay, does it seem like the market is affecting the residential real estate around here? How does it seem like it's affecting commercial real estate? Is it going to? It's super local, right? Because Salt Lake City may be almost not affected at all. New York City, though, New York City prices are going to drop, plain and simple. It's just the way it goes. They have a bad reputational hit that was born of the close quarters and the high use of public transit. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, but understanding and knowledge of your local space is the most important in real estate. So you say you wait out the status quo in a negotiation. How does that work in salary negotiations where the status quo is not having that job? Great question. The answer is, if you need to eat, you don't have any leverage. You can't be patient. You don't have optionality. And so you have to take that job. It means that you have very little negotiating power, and that's just the fact. You don't need to bemoan it. You just need to understand it, accept it, and then work within those confines. So one thing that you might say, you don't have to always negotiate on money for the salary. You could also negotiate on things that a good employer would find something useful. So you can say, look, I understand that I want to work very hard, and I'm fine with this salary. What I would like is if you could see possible to write into my contract that you'll buy me one book a week or something like that, or you'll buy me membership into some sort of professional networking group, right? And you can pitch it as saying, if you buy me the book a week, for example, I get to learn from that book, and I can take the learnings, bring them back to the company, understand it better, if that's your style. Or if the employer pays for your membership into this professional group, then you build out your network on your employer's dime. So you have to go different ways that still add value to your employer who wants you to join them, but isn't necessarily a huge monetary expense. So that's the answer is you don't have a lot of leverage. You just basically have to ask and say, and whether it's say actually or intimate it, that by doing this, I will add more value to you. And so that's the way I would negotiate. Your first job is you just take what it is most of the time, unless you're just a rock star that has really fantastic connections. But most people aren't in that situation when they come out of college. That was a great question.
Yeah, and Scott, you were kind of in a little bit of a unique situation when you came out of law school, because you had the opportunity to kind of wait it out. But what pressures were you feeling? Because I know like you had pressures from a lot of different areas to get a job. Like who
Yeah, that's so this, like I said, this is the second recession that I've written out. And I'm really glad that I had the recession when I did, because the downside scenario was not so bad. So I came out of law school in 2011, law school and business school. And there was nothing for lawyers at that time. There was absolutely no jobs. And so I came out of law school with a lot of debt and no prospects almost. And it was exacerbated by the fact that I had done the degrees together, and I'd done them in a shortened timeline, so that rather than get an internship during a summer, I did some during the school years to help with my network, but rather than get an internship during the summer, I had gone to study to finish my MBA side of things. So I had made the mistake of not building out my network properly. And so luckily, I was very lucky in that my wife at the time had a steady job. And so I could make up for those poor decisions. Right? So some of this is coming from experience and I've been through it, and it was lucky, but I feel lucky to have been through the adversity, to have learned from it. But yeah, so what I did, Sarah, great question, was to spend a lot of time, networking, essentially meeting people and asking them for advice. When you ask people for advice, they give you a lot more usually. And so I asked a lot of people for advice, and I finally found someone who needed a little bit of help, but he didn't need full-time help. And so this is where I negotiated. I said, look, keep me on just do part-time, pay me hourly as a contractor, so you don't have to do a whole bunch of paperwork. I want the experience. It's what I need. You can pay me almost nothing. And in the meantime, I will help build your business. And by that, I mean that I will actually try to bring in work. And what happens was that I went back to my network that I had been developing over the 5 months or so that I was unemployed, which is an awful, awful sentiment, by the way. Not having a mission is just terrible. But I made it my mission to build a network. And I went back to my network and I brought in some business. It was small, but it was enough to see and to prove myself. And then I talked in general concepts. And so I ended up getting a job with that law firm. It was a small one, for 3 years. And I had envisioned myself going to some big law firm, the white shoe up in the, tall buildings somewhere. And it didn't work out that way. But what happened was that I got a way better education than my peers, because this partner was a small law firm. He was throwing a bunch of work onto me. My very first assignment, which is just astounding, was negotiating with a labor union on behalf of a company. It was, nobody gets that. Nobody gets to get on the phone on behalf of a client and negotiate with a labor union. And the experience that I got for a small amount of money was, worth it, 100% worth it. And I would do it again. And I was lucky. I was very, very lucky to have a wife that had a salary and allowed me to do that. So that gets me thinking about optionality. I should have made better decisions, and I was bailed out of that. But if I had to go back and give advice, it would be, many of you won't be in that situation. So you need to preserve the optionality yourself. Maybe that's living with your parents. Maybe it's living, getting roommates and living 8 to a 4-bedroom house, whatever it takes. And maybe it's working jobs and then moonlighting as writing white papers for people, which is like essentially doing research, writing something, getting your name on it, and publishing it, and getting to know people, probably for no pay, but they get the marketing out of it, and you get the understanding of the subject matter.
You know, you said that maybe your living expenses are like $20,000 a year. My very first job, I made 25.5, and then I worked as a waitress in the evenings to supplement that, right? Because it was difficult to live on that, but we made it through. All right. Anybody else? I was actually thinking, Scott, too, you were receiving a lot of pressure from your institution, from the college to get a job.
Yeah.
Wanted to bolster their numbers, and
that was a little sneaky. They wanted to bolster their post-graduation employment numbers. And so what they were doing is they were going to those who were still not employed by the end of I think it was a month after graduation or something, to offer fellowships, which is essentially a grant that allows you to do some small amount of work for the university. So I didn't really like that very much, but what it did was it allowed me to also leverage that into this discussion with the law firm, and to say, look, I have this option to take this. I'm going to get paid here, and basically it's like you're not going to be violating any wage hour laws or anything like that by hiring me, because I have this fellowship, and we can just translate that into this employment and call it a fellowship. So I took what advantage I could, as dishonest as I thought it was. It was something that I had, from the university standpoint, it was something that I had to do, and I had to use whatever was available to me in order to make the progress happen.
All right. Do we have any more questions around maybe even just relocating for a job? Scott, you've been in Boston, you've been in Salt Lake City, you've been in Knoxville. I guess it's a little bit different once you have a family, but what was the toughest thing to adjust to when you took a job like outside of not your hometown necessarily, but just, like when you moved for a job, when you relocated for a job?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I follow opportunity if I can, but I don't follow it blindly, because there are a lot of factors that go into things that aren't money or career, and they're very important, and that includes the network and the place that you're in. It provides you with optionality if you go back to it. And what I did in this most recent one is kind of telling. I basically took a list of 10 factors, and then I put the options that I had. It was either stay in my current job, leave my current job and start my own company, or go to this new one. And then I scored it on 1 to 5 on this matrix for each cell. And then I tallied them at the bottom. And I would do this in different states of mind, so that I could understand if I was tired, the ranking might be different. And some of the factors could be anything from, yes, career, to also the family, just a whole lot of different factors of life. So career potential growth in addition to the current career, salary, things like that. So I took those and I ranked them, and they were all, in this particular instance, they were all very, very close. So then I had to go through a different rubric, and it was applying different mental models. And I actually, in this one, I applied the model of optionality, which is the actual stock options that I have. And that was what tipped the scales in this particular instance. But yeah, I mean, while you guys are young and have less baggage, if you can go somewhere for another opportunity, you should definitely consider that if it's worth it. Rank your factors and be honest with yourself about, is there career growth here, or is it, just for the money? Is it worth leaving my network? How quickly can I do it in the new place? What's the cost of living in the new place, right? A lot of people have made the mistake of taking a job in the Bay Area and spending all of that $100,000 salary on living. And that's just the way it goes. And you can't get out of that, cycle. So you have to be honest with yourself, really talk to people, understand the situation you're going into. But right now, as most of you, I assume, are young and just coming out of college, taking a risk has much less downside than not taking it. The upside is likely very high, and not taking it, your upside is very small. So taking risks right now is a good thing.
All right, folks, do we have any other questions for Scott?
Sarah, you can feel free to give out my email to anybody who wants to reach out with any questions. I know I never really asked questions in class. It was just not my style. But feel free to give out my email, and anybody can reach out to me with any questions.
Great. I was going to share before we left. So, you talked about your wife having, that stable job and being able to support you. And can I show the picture of you guys in Salt Lake?
Sure. I don't know which one you're showing, but sure.
It's the one of the ones that Tammy just recently posted. So this is Scott's family. We love them. These are his 2 boys and his wife. And anyway, she's a fantastic lady too. So
I can't see the picture.
Can you not?
It just says Sarah has started screen sharing.
Oh, hold on just a second then. Sorry. Well, then if you can't see it, probably the students can't see it either. Let's see. Can you see it now?
Oh, okay. Now I can.
Yeah. That was just recently.
Yeah.
Cool. So, all right, guys. So I will give you Scott's contact information. Scott, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I know I don't usually stand up and pontificate here, but I appreciate it. They were really good questions. And really, please don't hesitate to reach out. I may be slow to respond. Sometimes we're handling a lot of changes going on right now, and we are doing our best to position our company to take advantage of those changes. But I'd love to share all of my learnings and my mistakes. And so feel free to reach out. Glad to have the occasional phone call if you want, or connect on LinkedIn. Just let me know. I'm glad to help however I can.
Great. Thank you. And
right.
I'm going to stick around for just a moment. But Scott, we'll let you get to your day.
All right. It was nice to meet all of you.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah. Bye. All right. Cool. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. He's just a wealth of knowledge, especially everything that he's kind of been through, and to be even, a little bit younger. He's, 8 months younger than me. So we go back a long time. Okay. So I do want to, he had talked to you a little bit about components of negotiation, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that right now. I'm going to stop the recording here.